The rain was coming down in sheets outside, the kind you rarely see, not a drizzle, but as if the sky had split open, trying to wash the whole world clean. I sat on the living room sofa, curled up in an old blanket, watching a movie I wasn't even really paying attention to. The clock showed 1 in the morning. I lived in an old house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by woods. It was usually quiet, but in this kind of weather, every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified. The unease started with a knock at the door. I thought it was just the wind at first. The wind did all sorts of strange things in that old house, making the doors rattle and the windows shake. But I waited a moment, and then the knocking came again, louder this time, and more insistent. My heart instantly jumped into my throat. Who would be knocking at my door in this kind of awful weather, in the middle of the night? I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. It was pitch black outside, the rain blurring my vision, but I could just make out a vague silhouette. The person was tall, wearing a dark raincoat with the hood pulled low, obscuring most of their face. They weren't holding an umbrella, and rain streamed down their coat, glinting in the light from the porch. They stood there motionless, like a statue. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't open the door. I held my breath, hoping they would just leave. A few minutes passed, and the knocking stopped. I thought they were gone. I exhaled, turning to go back to the living room. Just then, I heard a faint click coming from the doorknob. My body froze. That wasn't the wind, nor the old house settling. It was a distinct metallic sound. I spun around, staring intently at the doorknob. The doorknob gently turned, then stopped. My heart was pounding like it wanted to burst from my chest. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial. I heard a sigh, as if coming from outside the door, very faint, almost drowned out by the sound of the rain. Then the doorknob turned again, this time more forcefully, as if someone was trying to twist it open. A chill ran from my feet straight to my head. He was trying to get in. I grabbed an old umbrella from beside the door, clutching it tightly, my knuckles white. The person outside started to ram the door with their shoulder. Each impact made the entire doorframe vibrate, and the old wooden door groaned in protest. I could hear their heavy breathing, muffled by the wood, sounding like the panting of some predator. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there. The moment the door splintered open, I shoved the umbrella out with all my might. I heard a muffled grunt, then the thud of something heavy hitting the ground. I bolted, not daring to look back at the person. Rain lashed down on me as I stumbled towards my car. My hands were shaking so badly it took several attempts to get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I floored the accelerator, the tires spun and shrieked, and then the car shot into the rainy night. I drove all the way to the nearest 24-hour convenience store before I dared to stop. My body was still trembling, my throat tight, barely able to speak. The young clerk looked startled by my disheveled appearance. I incoherently told him someone had tried to break into my house. He helped me call the police. They arrived quickly and took me back to the house. The lock was completely broken, and there was a clear shoe print on the door. The police found a rusty crowbar on the porch floor, along with a few drops of blood. They followed the blood trail for a short distance, but it was quickly washed away by the rain. They searched the area all night, but found nothing. The next day, the police told me they had checked the neighbor's surveillance footage and found that the person had been lurking around my house in the rain for a long time, at least 3 hours. He had been watching in the darkness, waiting until the rain was heaviest to make his move. I never went back to that house. I sold everything I could and threw the rest away. Every time a rainy night comes, I feel a deep fear, as if those eyes are still watching me from the dark. I know I'll never find out who that person was or why they came. But from that day on, I understood that some evil is real, and it hides in the darkest corners of humanity, like a silent ghost, always ready to appear when you are most vulnerable. That happened 3 years ago, but even now, whenever the rain comes down in sheets, drumming hard against the window pane, my heart still seizes up as if gripped by an icy hand. At the time, to save some money on rent, I had temporarily moved back into my parents' old house in the suburbs. They were on a month-long trip to Europe, leaving me with the house and their old golden retriever, Biscuit. The house stood at the end of a small hill, half enclosed by dense woods, a good drive from the nearest neighbor. On most days, I enjoyed the tranquility, but when the storm that swept the entire region rolled in, that tranquility turned into a suffocating isolation. The rain started in the evening. It was just a drizzle at first, but by 10 o'clock it had become a torrential downpour. I was curled up on the sofa under a blanket, sipping hot cocoa and half watching a show on Netflix. The sounds of the rain, the wind, and the old house's occasional creaks wove together into a chaotic symphony. Biscuit was restless. Instead of lying at my feet as he usually did, he paced anxiously around the living room, a low growl occasionally rumbling in his throat. "Hey buddy, relax," I soothed him, reaching out a hand. "It's just thunder." But his gaze was fixed on the glass sliding door that led to the backyard. I followed his stare, but I couldn't see anything beyond the dark, rain-blurred yard. The first sign of wrongness was subtle, so small I almost dismissed it as my imagination. In a lull between claps of thunder, I thought I heard a scraping sound. It came from the side of the house, right below the kitchen window. It was faint, like a tree branch blown by the wind, scratching against the wooden siding. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was normal. But a few minutes later, the sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't a branch. The rhythm was too steady. Scrape, scrape, like fingernails dragging across paint. Biscuit's growl grew louder. His ears perked up, his body tense. I muted the TV, and the house was instantly swallowed by the sound of the storm. Holding my breath, I listened intently. The scraping stopped. In its place came a sound that chilled me even more, a dull, distinct squelch from the mud in the backyard. It was the sound of a person stepping onto the waterlogged grass. My blood ran cold. Our backyard was enclosed by a high wooden fence, and the only entrance was a side gate that required a key. Who would be in my backyard in this weather? I quietly slid off the sofa, crouched down, and crawled to the window. Carefully, I lifted a corner of the blinds. It was pitch black outside, the rain a gray waterfall, and I couldn't see a thing. The backyard motion sensor light hadn't turned on, which was strange. That light was usually so sensitive it would flick on for a stray cat. Fear, like a vine, began to wrap around my heart. I slowly backed away into the center of the living room, grabbing the heavy fire poker from beside the fireplace. That's when I heard it, the soft, tentative sound of a doorknob turning. It was coming from the back door in the kitchen. My heart was about to pound its way out of my chest. I tiptoed to the kitchen entrance and peeked through the crack in the doorway. The brass doorknob was turning, ever so slowly, with an unnatural patience. Terrified, I lunged forward and threw all my weight into twisting the deadbolt home. Almost at the exact same moment, the doorknob stopped turning. Silence fell outside, except for the rain. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, clutching the poker so tightly my knuckles were white. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. I started to wonder if I was overreacting. Maybe it was just the wind, a lost drunk. But then, a face appeared at the kitchen window in front of me without any warning. It was the face of a man, pale and swollen, drenched and colorless from the rain. His wet hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were like two empty holes in the darkness, staring right at me. We were separated only by a thin layer of glass streaked with rainwater. He had no expression, not anger, not joy, just a horrifying, vacant stare. A short scream escaped me. I stumbled backward instinctively, tripping over the dining table behind me and crashing hard onto the floor. The instant I fell, a tremendous crash erupted not from the window in front of me, but from the living room, the sound of the glass sliding door shattering. The noise of splintering glass mixed with Biscuit's furious barking. I ignored the pain, scrambling up from the floor with only one thought in my mind: run. I didn't go for the front door. It was too close to the living room. I bolted for the door to the basement, the only solid wood door in the house. I threw myself into the basement, slammed the door shut behind me, and slid the old, heavy iron bolt into place. I could hear heavy, soaking wet footsteps upstairs. He was inside. He was in my house. The footsteps paced through the living room, then stopped. Biscuit's frantic barking suddenly turned into a pained yelp, which was then cut short. Dead silence. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stop myself from crying out. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I hid under the cold staircase, surrounded by darkness and the smell of damp earth. I could hear him right outside the door. I could almost hear his steady breathing. Then he started pushing against the door, again and again. The iron bolt groaned in its old frame. Suddenly, the pushing stopped. I heard him walk away. The footsteps faded, seeming to head back toward the living room. A few moments later, I heard the front door open and then close. After that came a long silence, with only the wind and rain remaining. I don't know how long I stayed in that basement. Maybe an hour, maybe 3. It wasn't until a faint light appeared on the horizon and the rain began to subside that I finally, on trembling legs, unbolted the door and went upstairs. The house was a wreck. Shattered glass, muddy footprints, and Biscuit lying in a pool of blood. I called the police. They came, took my statement, and searched the scene, but they found nothing useful besides the untraceable footprints. They said it was probably a random burglar, using the storm for cover. I moved out of that house and never went back, but it was during my last visit, when the police asked me to confirm if anything was missing, that I discovered the most terrifying thing. The intruder hadn't taken anything valuable. The TV, the computers, my mother's jewelry, all untouched. He only took one thing. On the kitchen table, where a spare set of keys was usually kept, there was now an empty space. On that keyring wasn't just the key to the house. It also had the key to the apartment I was renting in the city. To this day, the police have never found him. I've changed all my locks and moved twice, but the fear has never left me. I don't know who he was or why he did it. All I know is that on a stormy night, a stranger broke into my life, took something, and left something behind. A wound that will never heal, and a chilling, unanswered question. He knew who I was, and he knew where I lived. And that rainy night, perhaps, was just the beginning. As your typical corporate drone, working late into the night was nothing new to me. Last Tuesday was another one of those nights. When I dragged my exhausted body out of the office building, the rain was coming down in sheets, making the entire city look like it was submerged behind a vast, blurry pane of glass. I was in my old Volkswagen, heading home on the elevated highway. It was past midnight, and the road was nearly empty. The windshield wipers swung dutifully back and forth, each swipe granting only a second or two of clarity before the view was once again consumed by the dense curtain of rain. The city lights smeared across the wet glass like a chaotic Van Gogh painting. That's when I saw it in my rearview mirror. The car. It was an old model black sedan, a make I couldn't identify, but it looked heavy, its lines rigid and imposing. It was following me from a distance, its two dim, yellow headlights cutting through the downpour like a pair of tired eyes, watching me silently. At first, I didn't think anything of it. A car following another on the highway is perfectly normal. I kept driving, listening to the static-laced midnight show on the radio. About 5 minutes later, I glanced at the rearview mirror again. It was still there, maintaining the exact same distance. It didn't try to overtake, nor did it fall behind. A strange feeling began to creep in. I noticed a detail, one so minor it was almost imperceptible. My own car's hood and windshield were being hammered by huge raindrops, creating a dense, drumming sound. But that black car, it looked unnaturally clean. Through my mirror, under the glow of its dim headlights, I couldn't see a single trace of rain hitting its body. No splashes, no streaming water stains. Its black paint was as smooth as a piece of obsidian, as if the torrential downpour simply didn't exist in its world. It's just an illusion, I told myself. Maybe it has some high-end hydrophobic coating, or it's just the angle of the lights. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the absurd thought. To test my theory, I decided to take a small exit ramp I rarely used, getting off the highway early. I flicked on my turn signal and steered smoothly off the main road. I made a point to check my mirror. The black car didn't follow. It continued straight along the highway, eventually disappearing into the depths of the rain. I breathed a long sigh of relief, feeling a bit paranoid. However, about 10 minutes later, as I was driving on the surface streets, I stopped at a red light. I habitually glanced at my left side mirror. My heart skipped a beat. The black sedan was there, parked silently in the lane to my left rear, parallel to me. The same heavy frame, the same dim, yellow eyes. When did it get here? Where did it come from? I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was just another vintage car of the same model. Coincidences happen. The red light seemed to last an eternity. I didn't dare look at it again, instead fixing my eyes on the signal ahead. I could feel my palms starting to sweat. I turned up the radio, hoping the noise would drown out the unease in my heart. The light turned green, and I practically launched myself forward. I started speeding, trying to shake it. But no matter how fast I went, every time I checked the mirror, it was there. Not too close, not too far, always maintaining that same, fixed, suffocating distance. The most terrifying part was still that bizarre phenomenon. Water from the puddles on the street splashed high as my tires cut through them, and the rain washed over my car in waves. But the black car remained pristine. It was as if the rain evaporated just before touching its surface, repelled by some invisible force field. It was like a void moving through the rain, a pocket of absolute dryness. I started to question my sanity. Was I hallucinating from overwork and fatigue? I pinched my thigh hard. The sharp pain told me this was all real. Fear, like a vine, wrapped itself around my spine. I was too scared to go home, terrified it would follow me all the way to my door. I began driving aimlessly through the city, hoping to lose it in the maze of streets. It was useless. It was like my shadow. Wherever I went, it followed. Finally, on a deserted stretch of road, another red light. I stopped. This time it slowly, very slowly, pulled up on my right side, stopping parallel to me, window to window. My blood ran cold. Stiffly, inch by inch, I turned my head to look at the black car. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see inside. I held my breath, staring at that dark pane of glass, hoping to see a driver. Even a menacing one would have been a relief. It would at least prove this was a malicious prank, or that I'd encountered a madman. But there was nothing. Just as I was about to give in to despair, I saw it. No, not a driver. Something on the window. On that perfectly dry pane of glass that seemed to repel all rain. A small, child-sized handprint slowly materialized on the inside. The print was wet, as if it had just been pressed there. Then, from the edge of that tiny handprint, a single trickle of water began to run down, slowly, slowly, from the inside of the glass. In that instant, every hair on my body stood on end. An ice-cold thought, sharp as a lightning strike, pierced my mind. The storm wasn't being kept out of the car. It was being kept in. The light turned green. I don't know how I managed to stomp on the gas pedal. I only remember that my mind went blank, consumed by a single instinct, escape. I ran red lights, speeding through the midnight streets faster than I ever had before. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again. Not even once. I burst into my apartment's underground garage, didn't even park the car properly, just stumbled out and ran for the elevator. I got back to my apartment and locked every lock I had. I sold the car the very next day, for a ridiculously low price. I don't dare drive late at night anymore, especially not on rainy nights. To this day, whenever it rains outside, and I stand at my window watching the blurred, passing headlights on the street below, I can't help but wonder, which wet road is that black car on now, silently following another tired, unlucky soul? And has another small, wet handprint appeared on the inside of its window?